Extremist is a word that we generally don't like to hear, especially when it's used against us, right? Nobody likes to be that one. Yet The Guardian here, and The Guardian's a British paper, so it's not an American, but it talks about extremist killers. And it says here, these people that went in and it was a religiously motivated terrorist attack. They say this: it's important to try to unpack, even with the still limited information available, what we do know about Christian extremist ideology. The Deputy Commissioner of Queensland Police, Tracy Linford, indicated that evidence pointed toward the attacker subscribing to what we would call a broad Christian fundamentalist belief system known as premillennialism, which drove a direct attack upon police. Premillennialism may be understood as a form of evangelical Christian belief centered on the second coming of Jesus Christ. It has a number of offshoots grounded in different interpretations of text, primarily, but not limited to, the book of Revelation. A period of intense tribulation defined by corruption and great evil, which some adherents believe is currently taking place, will precede the rapture. For many evangelicals, a terrifying event. I don't find it that terrifying, but whereby the good will ascend into heaven and the evil be brutally punished. This will be followed, based on their belief, by a 1,000-year reign of Christ, defined by peace and salvation. While some evangelical Christians view the end times as a metaphor for personal salvation, others believe it's a literal, physical event for which they must prepare. Christian extremism. I have an article here by Douglas Murray that's talking about people that are extremists are people that read C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and are linked to books like, ironically enough, 1984 by George Orwell. Those are extremist views. Now, we are afraid generally when we're talking about extremists in other places, right? I remember during the War on Terror, they wouldn't talk about Muslims, they would talk about extremist Muslims. And that phrase makes it seem like there's something wrong to be an extremist. Why are we so afraid of extremists? Well, we feel like, in a way, that they're outside the bounds of what is normal. And as being outside the bounds of what might be normal, they are dangerous. What's the danger of being an extremist? Well, the danger is that you might let your ideology drive your life, and you might focus on something way too much. Now, if it's something that's unimportant, I could see how that might be dangerous, or if you take it too far. For instance, you can be a Chiefs fan, but if you were trying to kill Nick Sirianni in order that your team might win the Super Bowl, that would be an extremist view. Especially for most of us, we're like, this is just a football game. It's not worth killing anybody over, right? But what if it was something more important? What if it was something worth fighting for? Can we be over extreme about following God? And if so, what does that look like? What would that look like? We have an idea what the world says it looks like. You know, if you're over interested in your country being something, a place worth living, then you're probably the kind of person that reads, Tolkien. Or you're probably the kind of person that believes there's going to be a rapture someday. Well, I don't subscribe to that, but I guess I don't also shy away from that moniker of extremist. I don't know, in a way, what's so bad about being called an extremist. As long as we're not talking about Muslim extremists that would go and, again, according to their ideology. See, here's the thing. When they say you're driven by ideology, everybody's driven by ideology. The ideology is just the way you look at the world and what you think should be done. And I don't know, the way I read the Gospels, I think that's the point, that we, in our evangelization, are trying to get people to understand our ideology. And I guess that makes us extremists. Now, the extremists in the Old Testament were people called the Nazarites. And so we're here in Numbers chapter 6. And you remember that we've said that all of the nation of Israel were called out. They were people that were separated from the world and God's people. But they were also allowed to go even farther than that and consecrate certain things to the Lord. They could make a vow to God, I'm giving you this sheep, or I'm making this offering as a vow to the Lord, and it's a bull, usually because you wanted something from God, some kind of favor. God, I want to do this, and so I'm making a vow to you that if you do this, I will do this, or I will do this and expect that you might do this. That was normal vows. But there were some people that were so extreme in their devotion to God that they wanted to give themselves. They wanted to give themselves wholly to God. I am totally, totally dedicated to you, God, and whatever you want, that's what I want too. They were the extremists. Now, people didn't always like that these Nazarites would give themselves to God. In fact, in Amos chapter 2, Amos condemns people that are trying to give wine, we'll look at that later, trying to give wine to the Nazarites because they didn't like that there were these people. And I think part of that is when there's someone who's really serious about their faith, that makes me feel bad because I'm not as serious in my faith as they are. Or I try to make excuses. Well, I mean, you don't want to go too far. And here's the thing, we're living in a culture that's making it seem like, honestly, just regular Christian life is like way out there. And rather than like going along with the culture and saying, well, yeah, you're right, I guess I better tone that down. The Bible calls us to not only stand where we should be and where we ought to be, but also just to lean further into Christ. And the extremists are people that will draw closer to Christ. Now, again, I'm using that word to hopefully just get us used to using that word in a way that isn't so scary in a way. You know, if I say we should all be extremists, the way that word is being used, everybody kind of shrinks back from it. But I'm asking the question, what does it mean to be an extremist when it comes to following God? So let's first ask the question, what was a Nazarite? The root word is the word Nazir. And 12 times in the Bible it's translated Nazarite. 2 times it was translated the undressed vine, or a vine that hadn't been gone through yet. So it kind of looked shaggy, it looked unkempt, I guess is the idea. And 2 times the word is translated separate or separated. The word means something that was set apart or something that was held aloof. During the time of a vow then, when the Nazarite would come and make their vow, they were then separated unto the Lord. And so we see in verse number 2 here, speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto the Lord. And then he goes on to give the directions. Look at verse number 8. All the days of his separation, he is holy unto the Lord. And so it was, at its base, it was, I am going to do things to be even more separate. Again, all the people of God were separated to God, but I'm going to do something that's even more separated to God. I'm going to take another step to be completely holy and separated to the Lord. That was what the vow of the Nazarite was. The Nazarite wasn't a type of person. It wasn't, this tribe. Anybody could take the vow, man or woman could take the vow of the Nazarite. And what they were saying is, I want to be separated unto the Lord. I want to live my life in such a way that I am holy to God, that I am sanctified to God, that I am consecrated to God. So what did it entail? Well, according to the text, there's really 3 marks of what a Nazarite was to do. Verse number 3, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. So first of all, no grape products at all. No alcoholic beverages, no grapes, no vinegar, no raisins, nothing. Now, like the priests were not allowed to have alcoholic beverages, because like we talked in January on my Sunday night series, the idea that something could influence you and you could make a bad decision or not have all of your faculties ready to serve the Lord, that was a bad thing. And so all the time that the Nazarites were in this vow, they could not drink any wine or strong drink, and even going farther to say they couldn't have any grapes or raisins or any part of it. I'll talk about why that is a little bit later, but that was one of the things. That's how you knew a Nazarite. They would not have any kind of grapes or grape product. Verse number 5, all the days of the vow of his separation, there shall no razor come upon his head until the days be fulfilled in the which he separateth himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and let the locks of the hair of his head grow. He could not cut his hair. He had to let it grow and grow and grow until the end of that period, and then he could cut it. Now, again, this is especially true for men, and he kept people who normally just kept their hair somewhat short. And again, the word short and the word long sometimes vary from culture to culture, but it was this idea that he was a sign to everybody else, oh, that guy must be a Nazarite because he's different from everybody else. He's got his hair longer. And then verses 6 and 7 give the final characteristic of a Nazarite. It says, verse 6, all the days that he separateth himself unto the Lord, he shall come at no dead body. He shall not make himself unclean for his father, or for his mother, for his brother, or for his sister when they die, because the consecration of his God is upon his head. All right, so there were 3 things you knew about a Nazarite. You knew that they couldn't have any kind of grape product, they had long hair, and they couldn't help with a funeral. They couldn't touch a dead body. Now, how long did it last? For most people, it was a short period of time. The rabbinic tradition is that it would be at the very least 30 days. And even if you said, I only want it to be 12 days, you had to pick 30. But it was either 30 or 60 or 100 most of the time when someone took a Nazarite vow. Now, there were a few people in the Bible who actually had a Nazarite vow their whole life, right? Well, they were supposed to anyway. Samson was one of those from his birth, was consecrated to the Lord as a Nazarite. And the angel even said to his parents, no grapes, no cutting his hair, and no touching a dead body. Samuel also, his mother said, no cutting his hair. The Bible doesn't say he was a Nazarite, but that's been the assumption throughout the years that Samuel was also a Nazarite. And most people think that John the Baptist was as well. Maybe just because he lived in the wilderness where there were no barbers. I don't know. But there was something the idea was it was to signal something radical in a person's life. And so they would go through this, and again, not always for their whole life. Sometimes for just a short little period. And at the end of that, then they would come and bring sacrifices to the Lord. Look at verse 18. The Nazarite shall shave the head of his separation at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall take the hair of the head of his separation, and put it in the fire which is under the sacrifice of the peace offerings. And the priest shall take the sodden shoulder of the ram, and 1 unleavened cake out of the basket, and 1 unleavened wafer, and shall put them upon the hands of the Nazarite after the hair of his separation is shaven. And the priest shall wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. This is holy for the priest with the wave breast and the heave shoulder, and after that the Nazarite may drink wine. This is the law of the Nazarite, who hath vowed, and of his offering unto the Lord for his separation. Beside that his hand shall get, according to the vow which he vowed, so he must do after the law of his separation. And again, I'm not going to go into all the details, but afterward, they would shave their head, they would put their hair in the fire that's under the sacrifice, and they would take a wafer and the shoulder of an animal, so imagine this big hunk of meat, and they would wave it before the Lord. Why, Pastor, you brought the tabernacle up last week. Why didn't you bring a big hunk of meat and wave it around? We have our limits, right? But that's what they would do. They would have this heave and wave offering. And that was the end of the Nazarite vow. Okay, so that's what it was. Now, what's the point? Why is it in here? What is it? Well, the Bible never actually comes right out and says it. It doesn't say, this is the benefit. Like if you have anything that you're going to sign up for, there's usually like, oh, and if you do it, then this is the good thing that might happen to you. There's no like, if a person will take the vow of the Nazarite, I will make sure that they or their wife have many children. Or I will make sure that every year that they have the Nazarite vow that their crop will produce fourfold. Or anything like that. It was just somebody who wanted to show their devotion to God and say, God is so important to me that I want to take these steps. So looking at this characteristic, What can we learn about that in our own consecration to the Lord? First of all, it was an act of self-sacrifice. They were doing without. In a way, they were fasting. Now, not totally, but there was a form of, I'm going to do without this thing that everybody else does. Everybody else can have grapes. Everybody else can have wine. Everybody else can cut their hair. Everybody else can help with a funeral, but I am choosing to do without those somewhat important things that we do. It's good, I think, to go without sometimes. We are so used to, in our culture, of getting everything that we want and getting it, honestly, right now. I'm hungry for this. Well, what do you know? I have a car that's warm that can get me to the store, and I can go buy that thing, and I can have it within half an hour of wanting it. You know, I like that shirt that somebody else is wearing. I can find that exact same shirt online and have it at my house in 2 days. We're so used to having what we want that we get to the point where we're pampering ourselves. And can I just say, as a Christian discipline, sometimes it's good to say no to yourself. Sometimes it's good to go without. Sometimes when you go without a lot of things for a period of time, you really start to be thankful for the things you have. You really start to learn how to say no to your own flesh. And you really learn a kind of dependence that I wouldn't say you can't learn, but that you won't learn without doing without. I think a fast is a good thing to do. Some of you, I know, medically, you can't do, and that's okay. You can't do a whole day fast or a 5-day fast. That's really okay. But I've done fasts in the past, and not just, I lost some weight, or, I had this, I can give you all kinds of health benefits for a fast. I'm just talking from a spiritual standpoint. Learning to tell your flesh no for a couple days is really good, and it really bleeds into a lot of other areas of life. We have become so self-indulgent, and the vow of the Nazarite is just to say, I'm gonna not just do without, but I'm gonna make it kind of hard on myself, so that during that time I have this reminder of doing without. And when was the last time you took deliberate steps to not feed your flesh? Can you recall a time when it wasn't that you said no because you couldn't, but you said no when you could and still said, no, I won't? When was the last time that you did something like that? When was the last time you made yourself uncomfortable to draw yourself to the Lord? So, first of all, it was an act of self-sacrifice. Second, it was a spectacle. Now, of course, everybody's going to know that something's different. You're at a wedding and they say, would you like a glass of wine? You say, no, I'm sorry, I'll have water instead. Water, it's a wedding. Here you go, have some grape juice. No, I'm sorry, I can't. I've taken the vow of a Nazarite. No, of course, they would know that before that. Why? Because your hair was long. Now, just because you had long hair doesn't mean you were consecrated to the Lord, right? Absalom had long hair, and he was absolutely consecrated to himself. Absalom was big on Absalom. And honestly, so was Samson. But God gave special grace for Samson to bring physical deliverance to Israel. But it was something where everybody would know, and everybody would know because you had long hair. Now, 1 Corinthians 11:14 says, doth not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him? That means the normal way that men wear their hair is short. And again, short by whatever society, it's short. But when you have long hair, people notice. There's that picture of, you're doing something in a way to draw attention to your devotion to God. Now again, that doesn't, just because some guy has long hair, doesn't mean they're consecrated to the Lord. People like Absalom were, but it was generally a sign. You're doing something to make yourself stick out, and even something that is, again, in the New Testament called a shame, so that you can show people that you are doing this. Now again, it was obvious in his actions as well. Think about how hard it would be, because it doesn't say you can't touch a dead body. In verse number 6, it says you can't come at a dead body, which, again, just means come near. So most of us have never touched a dead body. And if you have, it hasn't been outside of a casket. You walk up to the casket and you might have just put your hand on a hand or a forehead or something like that. But most of you have not touched a dead body outside of a casket. And so we don't understand what that was like. I mean, somebody dies. I've been there. We call the ambulance. They call Tim Pearson or Kent Cease, and they come and they take the body away and they get it all cleaned up and they put it in a pretty box and they dress them up and they put them there and then you go and pay your respects. You don't have to do anything. But for back in those days, especially if it was a close family member, you had to take care of all of that, if there was any kind of embalming, and you had to bury them that day. And imagine how hard it would be for you've taken a Nazarite vow, and 15 days in, your father passes away. And you have to ask somebody else to do it all for you. And it says, come at. So I'm wondering if you're not even allowed to go up to the body to see it, or to go into the place where maybe your father is laying before they bury him in the ground. That would have been a very hard thing to do for someone, especially that you loved, to say, no, I'm consecrated to the Lord, and God, and my keeping my vow to the Lord is more important than this. It's more important than having wine. You say, well, what about the water? What if the water wasn't good quality? Wouldn't they put some of the alcoholic content into the water to kind of kill the bacteria? Yeah, I guess when you're a Nazarite, you'd have to take the chance that maybe that water is not going to be as pure. And you're going to take the chance that someone that you love may pass away and you can't be a part of saying goodbye. And people are going to be, oh, what's wrong with you? You got that long hair. And whatever the spectacle is, that was what you were signing up for. So what are some ways that others can tell that you're a Christian? I mean, are you a spectacle? And yes, I know that there are some Christians, not extremists, but some Christians who make themselves a spectacle for all the wrong reasons, right? The Christian that maybe is always talking about fringe things that the Bible doesn't really spell out precisely, but they take these little pet, their little hobby horses, and that's all they can talk about. Or they're always, maybe quoting Fox News in relation to a Bible verse when those things are pretty far apart. So understand what I'm saying is there any way for you to let others know that you're a Christian? What are the ways that people know, like at your job? Do your neighbors know that you're a Christian? Are your neighbors the kind of people that are you the kind of person that your neighbors would, if they had a problem, I just found out that my sister has cancer. Hey, would you pray for me? Are you the kind of people that they would actually come to because they know that you're serious about your faith? Right? Is there something that shows that you are an extremist when it comes to walking with God? Many people have ideas of what that would look like. And too often, as soon as we say, this is how a Christian should live, there comes the accusation of, well, you're just talking about legalism. I'm not talking about how a person is saved. I'm saying personal holiness standards, the way that I am living my Christian life. And it might look different than it does for you. It would be wrong of me to say, if you, Bob, you're wearing a black tie. If you were really saved, you'd have a blue tie. Okay, well, that would be legalism, right? But there's a lot of things that's like, well, this is why I'm doing this, and this is how I'm ordering my life, not because I'm trying to impress anybody else, but because I'm wholly consecrated to God. Your life ought to look different. You ought to be, it was a spectacle, it was a way to show other people. Again, not so that people could look at us, but what Jesus said in Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. That's important. To understand that it's not just about, I'm just going to live my life on my own, but there's an outness of your Christian walk, that you ought to be someone who's extreme in showing, I'm a Christian, and this is important to me. There ought to be some kind of difference. In 1 Peter chapter 4, Peter's writing to these Christians who are undergoing persecution now because they've become Christians, and it's pretty obvious that they are. And it says, for the time past of our life may suffice us to have wrought the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lasciviousness, lusts, excess of wine, revelings, banquetings, and abominable idolatries, wherein they think it strange that you run not with them to the same excess of riot, speaking evil of you. All right? They look at your life now and they say, why don't you do the things you used to do anymore? Why aren't you like me anymore? You're no fun. What, are you some kind of extremist? Is it okay to be able to say, yeah, I guess I am? I'm not trying to be pushy with it. I'm not trying to be showy, but yeah, I guess there's some things that I'm saying are important to me in my following the Lord. And I guess that's going to make me stick out a little bit. And that's okay. I'm really, really okay with that. So often, again, we feel like, I don't want to feel like an outsider. I don't want to be the weird one in my office. I don't want to be the one that my neighbors, when they drive by my house, they drive a little faster. I don't want to be that extremist. Well, listen, if God's called us to that, if he's called us to Christ and called us to be separated from the world, there's going to be a little bit of that. And again, I understand. I grew up around the Amish, and they wore clothes that made them inconspicuous, but you can always tell an Amish person. I mean, it's pretty conspicuous. So I understand. I'm not talking about the specifics. I'm saying between you and the Lord, is there a way that people know you're a Christian? Is there a way that people can tell you're a Christian? Third, I think it shows us the extreme of following Christ has a price. It was emotionally costly. I talked about this already, but they couldn't attend the funeral of a loved one. And if they ever did, they'd have to start all over again. If they said, all right, Lord, for 100 days, I'm going to be a Nazarite. And that day 57, look at verse number 9. And if any man die very suddenly by him, and he hath defiled the head of his consecration, then he shall shave his head in the day of his cleansing. On the 7th day shall he shave it. And on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtles, or turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons, to the priest, to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And the priest shall offer the one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering, and make an atonement for him, that he sinned by the dead, and shall hallow his head that same day. And he shall consecrate unto the Lord the days of his separation, and shall bring a lamb of the first year for a trespass offering. But the days that were before shall be lost, because his separation was defiled. In day 57, all of a sudden, you're talking with a friend, and they just keel over and touch you. It's not just, well, it wasn't my fault. What was I supposed to do? He touched me. I wasn't trying to touch him. I was trying to keep it. Doesn't matter. It says you've defiled that consecration, and so now you've got to start all over again at day 1. Go in, shave your head, take an offering, and say, I sinned against the Lord in breaking my vow, and I'm ready to start my vow all over again. It was extreme, but it has a price. It was also financially costly. When you were done with your vow, you had to go into the priest and say, all right, my vow is done. Here's what I'm going to do. Verse 13. And this is the law of the Nazarite. When the days of his separation are fulfilled, when he's all done, he shall be brought unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and he shall offer his offering unto the Lord, 1 he-lamb of the first year without blemish for a burnt offering, 1 ewe-lamb of the first year without blemish for a sin offering, and 1 ram without blemish for peace offerings, and a basket of unleavened bread, cakes of fine flour mingled with oil, and wafers of unleavened bread anointed with oil, and their meat offering and their drink offerings. So if you're going to do this vow, just know that at the end of all of that, you've got to bring all this stuff to the door and say, now I'm done. It was financially costly as well. Now I am devoting myself to the Lord for the next 100 days. I'm going to do these things I'm going to do without. And at the end of it, I'm going to bring these things. And if you look through all these sacrifices, it's all the sacrifices. You know, when you read at the beginning of Leviticus, there's a burnt offering and a sin offering and a peace offering and a trespass offering and a wave offering and a meat offering and a drink offering. All those are right here. He has to do all of them and say, Lord, before you, here's my offering to you. So our costs, again, might be, it was so expensive that some people would actually help poor Nazarites. When you're done with your vow, I'm going to, like Paul was in charges with some of the people because it was too expensive for them. They wanted to do this vow, but they couldn't. And so somebody had to come and help them provide some of these animals for them. It was costly. So our costs might be financial. I think it's important to support the work of God, missions, and the work of God in this area. And if you have other agencies that you're helping support, I think that's important. But very often, it comes like this, that we would spend our time wisely in non-pleasure pursuits, that you would spend that time reading the Bible, that you would get some good Christian books that are going to help you draw closer to the Lord, that you're going to spend some time discipling somebody, that the time that you would use, me time, Free time. I want this for me. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Can we all admit that we have wonderful conveniences in America, that we have a lot more time than most people had? We have time for discipleship. We have time for personal enrichment, growing in the Lord. We have time for prayer. We just don't take it. It might be financially costly, but there's a lot of other ways that we can make a sacrifice, and we can make those adjustments in our schedule. We could also, it also would look like this, that we would turn down opportunities for fun or for advancement. It hasn't come yet. It may. Most Christians throughout history have experienced at some point not getting the promotion or not getting this opportunity because they were an outspoken Christian. Because they chose to live their life consecrated to the Lord. They were going to be an extremist and then bear the consequences for that. It also means that we would use our resources to be a help to others. God's blessed all of you with resources, and God expects you to use those for Him as a sacrifice. It also shows that holiness sometimes has extreme lengths. So I thought about this week, and I'm not sure I would have come up with any good answers, so I looked at some commentaries. Why couldn't they have grapes? Like, I get alcohol, I get strong drink, I totally understand that, and that's fine. I don't even know if that was like that much of a sacrifice. And grape juice, I guess I could see how it could be fermented at some point. Unpasteurized grape juice actually ferments pretty quickly and actually, can get pretty bad. So I understand that, but why grapes? Why raisins? You know how many raisins you have to eat to get drunk? I don't, but I'm sure it's a big number. Why not raisins? Why not grapes? I think the idea is I want to be so careful that I don't get even close to, again, the alcohol part, that I'm willing to say no to a whole section of things. Now, sometimes, and I'll talk to you kids, teenagers, children. All right, I'm a child too, it's okay. I'm going to talk to you minors especially. Sometimes it's really hard for your parents to know where to draw the line. No, up to here. Well, why there? I don't know. But I have to pick a spot to say no to. And sometimes you have to say no to even things that might be good. We're not saying it's sinful. We're just saying no to these things because it's hard to draw a line somewhere. And I might be able to say yes to this, and this, and this, but I'm not always going to be there to say yes to those things and no to these things. So it's going to be easier for us to just say no. All right, listen, okay, so here's an example. And whether we're talking about teenagers or not, all right, could there be some really spiritually beneficial things on TikTok? I'm sure that there are, right? That's fine. But as a parent, is it going to be easy for you to be able to say, oh, yes, you can watch that one. Oh, no, you better not watch that one. Or to come up with a list of principles to say, oh, yes, if it has this and this in it, then it's fine. If it has this and this in it, then don't. Sometimes as a parent, it's just easier to say no to the whole thing, right? Okay, grapes are allowed, raisins are allowed, but not alcohol. But what if the grapes are a little bad? What about grapes that are broken and the juice is coming out? Well, I don't know where to put that line, so God just says no alcohol from strong drink that was really alcoholic to raisins. I'm going to ask you to say no to the whole thing. And yeah, it's true that you could eat raisins and not have any of your faculties broken, but we're going to just draw a line here. And we try to be careful in our raising our kids where we say, listen, we're not saying it's sinful if you do these things, or if you see somebody else doing that, we're not saying they're sinning. Just at our house, this is where we have to draw the line. We're not trying to be legalistic about it. We're just saying, we don't know where all those lines are, and I'm sorry, but it's just easier to say no to this. Now, are we getting it right? Maybe. Are we getting it wrong? Maybe. Maybe, probably. But the point here is that God says, here's the line. And it's going to encompass some things that aren't necessarily harmful. What's wrong with raisins? I don't know, raisins are supposed to be good for you, right? What's wrong with them? Nothing's wrong with them. God's not saying there's anything wrong with them. He's just saying when you do this vow, if you're going to be serious about your faith, if you're going to be consecrated, then there are a lot of things that might be good that you're going to have to say no to. And are you willing to be able to say, okay, then I'll accept that. If that's what you want, that's what I want too. And so back to you teenagers, just your parents, you know what? You might be right. They might totally be getting it wrong. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying they might. Go with it anyway because they're looking out for you. Okay? Don't argue. Don't try to well, what about this and this and this? Just go with it. Okay? You'll be happier in the end. Because taking holiness is important. Taking holiness seriously is important. And God has called us to holiness. So how can we be an extreme Christian? I think we can be extreme in our love for each other. Again, I'm not calling, but when they talk about extremists, they're talking about Christians with guns, and instead of Bible preaching and Bible reading, they're talking about getting more magazines here at the church so that we can finally take over. No, I'm not talking about that. That's not extreme Christianity. It's extreme something, but it's not extreme Christianity, right? We can be extreme in our love for each other. We can be extremely kind and extremely gentle. We can be extremely caring. So that other people, and they say, why do you care about those people so much? Those are my brothers and my sisters. Those are the people that I'm not just obligated to care for, but I really do. I love my church family. I love people that don't know Christ, and I want them to come to know the Lord. I want to be a special kind of person so that people see the love of God that I have in me. You can be extreme in our devotion, doing what it takes to seek to draw closer to the Lord. And that's so important. If you're going to seek the Lord, if you're going to draw closer to God, it is going to be saying yes to a lot. It's going to be saying no to a lot. And between you and God, saying, God, what's it going to take for me to draw closer to you? I don't always know the answer to that for you, but God does. It might be some kind of fasting. It might be some kind of vow. It might be some kind of doing without. But God knows what it's going to take to get you closer to him. We can be extreme in our care for a dying world. I know that it's not always easy to give the gospel. I know it's not always easy to speak up for Christ. I know that sometimes it's uncomfortable and sometimes we feel like we stick way out. And yet, as someone who's totally consecrated to the Lord, as a New Testament Nazarite, that we would somehow make a difference so that we could talk to somebody about the Lord. I as a high schooler, shy, not really wanting to be out there, I had such a burden for people to be saved that I would go out of my way. And there was one guy that on my cross-country team named Ross. And Ross would actually make fun of Christians. Didn't get it at all. But I tried to be kind to him. I tried to every point I could to try to show Christ to him and be a witness. And he started to get some other Christian friends. And my senior year, he went to a youth conference and got saved. And came back and thanked me for my testimony. Now, it wasn't me that saved him, but I was just a little part used by God to go out of my comfort zone and try to be a witness. In a time it would have been, again, especially in a sports context, very easy to be mocked. It would have been very easy to be put down. And even in a very conservative area like where I grew up in northern Indiana, a Mennonite community, even there, it was a hard thing to do. And yet God called me to be an extremist. Such an extremist that I would just mention him to some people that I knew and hope that God did something with it. And I do not think when we get to heaven, I'm trying to think of a scenario where in heaven God would say, you took me a little too seriously. Your devotion was too much. I wanted you to be holy, but I didn't mean like that holy. Do you think that's going to be the problem with us? Do you think we're going to stand before the Lord and he's going to say, boy, wow, you really went above and beyond what I was expecting? No. If anything, Satan, that would be a lie of Satan to make sure that we don't go farther than we should. I don't know what that looks like for you. I have a little bit of an idea of what that looks like for me. And it's not always a fun thing to think about, but let the Lord speak here this morning about your consecration to the Lord. I don't think it's about growing out your hair, doing without raisins, and never helping with a funeral. For you, it's going to be something very different. But the picture here in the Old Testament is one of total consecration in an extreme devotion